Good afternoon. This is week 9. In week 9, we're going to talk about different personality traits. And when we look at our personality, we look at the characteristics of our thinking, our feeling, and our acting. And that's really a pattern that develops over time. Next week, we'll actually talk about psychological disorders and different therapies. And it's important to remember that although children may have some different antisocial type behaviors, it really is uncommon to diagnose a child or anyone under 18 with a personality disorder, because the thought behind that is there hasn't been enough time for that person to develop that type of personality. So we're going to talk about some of the different areas that we've talked about in the past. The first is psychodynamic. And if you remember, psychodynamic talks about Freud. And he really believed that your personality comes from the unconscious and even irrational aspects of your personality, or what happened to you as a child. So he looks at conscious and also the unconscious minds. He did use hypnosis to try and uncover the patient's thoughts and belief systems or even memories. Later, after the patient had spent some time with Freud, he used a type of technique called free association. And this was basically just an opportunity for that individual to sit there and just talk about whatever came to their mind. Now, it's interesting because some people think of therapy as laying on the couch and there's a therapist sitting behind them writing down everything. And that really actually comes from Freud, because he was known to have 8-hour sessions. And so the clients obviously would get a little tired. And so he encouraged them to lay on the couch so that they could free associate all they needed to. And he really believed that he was superior. And so he did sit behind the clients and did take notes in regards to their case. Another one of the techniques or beliefs that Freud came up with would be the id, the ego, and the superego. And that's talked about within this chapter as well. Your id is really that psychic energy that works on the pleasure principle. It's the part of your unconsciousness that wants what it wants, when it wants it, and does not care whether there are any consequences that follow. Then we have the ego that's going to develop later after the id, and they are usually conscious, and it operates with the reality principle, such as if I eat 7 donuts, I'm probably going to vomit. And so it helps you decide that maybe it's not a good idea to eat that many donuts. And then we have the superego, which usually develops about 4 or 5 years old, and that reflects the moral values. So this would be the part of the personality, according to Freud, that believed I want those jeans, I don't have any money for them, so I'm going to steal them because I really need them and I deserve them. Your superego comes in and says, no, that's against the law, don't do that. And so those are the 3 different pieces of your personality, according to Freud. Freud also talked about defense mechanisms. And he said that your ego is going to try and protect itself against anxiety or any other issues within the body using these defense mechanisms. And so basically they function directly and unconsciously, so you may do them and not even realize it. Some of the more popular defense mechanisms are displacement, and that would be an example of someone is really angry at their parents, and so instead of yelling at their mom and dad, they're going to kick the dog because the dog is a less threatening target. So they're displacing their anger of their parents on the dog. The next would be projection, and that's basically an example would be thinking that someone hates you when in reality you're the one who hates them. Reaction formation is when, for example, maybe you're an overzealous crusader of immoral behaviors. You're against immoral behaviors, but you don't want to admit that you have this closet sexual desire that others might find a little bit different. Rationalization is just basically making an excuse, saying you drink to be sociable when in fact you really have some sort of a drinking addiction. Regression would be nail biting or maybe thumb sucking or some other behavior that you choose to use when there's an anxiety producing situation. Maybe you throw a temper tantrum like you used to when you were 4 or 5. And then denial, and that's really just an example would be a parent that doesn't want to admit that their child would cheat on a test because that's just not something that they've taught their children to do. The humanistic theory is going to draw the attention to the concept of self and also to that human potential for healthy growth. Remember Maslow from last week and his hierarchy. So really the humanistic theory draws on Maslow and then also Carl Rogers, who happens to be one of my favorite theorists if I had to pick one. And their perspective is going to highlight humans' potential. And Rogers looked at how a person nurtures growth in a relationship by using genuine, accepting, and empathic behavior. So he didn't care who you were, how much money you made, what your problem was. He genuinely was concerned for you and wanted to figure out, what could be done to help you. An example of Maslow and his hierarchy would be Andrew's grandfather lived a rich and productive life. He's spontaneous, he's loving, he's a self-accepting person. Maslow would say that he's reached that self-actualization stage. Social cognitive actually is a perspective that emphasizes the effects of our interactions within the environment. And so we'd have to look at Bandura in this case, and so he's going to focus on how the individual and the environment interact together and what does that mean for the individual. And so he really believed that our personality is shaped by our internal cognition, so the way we think, our behavior, and then any environmental type factors.